Hi everyone. So today we are starting a new show to especially address the challenges that are coming with COVID. And there is a Covid Consultative Group that's advising the ministers in the state of Karnataka. And over the next few days, we'll be inviting people from this group to talk to us, to give us an idea of what's going on and what we need to do. So today, and by the way, this group has, I think as I mentioned yesterday, this group has a very, very different set of people. It has people from the law, from design thinking, from technology, from medicine, from policy, from the government. So there is a big mix of people, and it's extremely important to have a very interdisciplinary approach to solve these problems. So on one hand, we have to think about it from a legal point of view as to what are our rights, what are the legally, what are we supposed to provide, how do we protect our citizens and doctors, etc. On the other hand, there's a psychological aspect of of how we'll all be dealing with being locked with the lockdown. I mean, it's one thing to be in a big house to have a lockdown. It's another thing if you're in a highly dense area, if you're living in a one room, how does it feel? What are the psychological implications of this? And how do we take care of less fortunate so that they get the food and things like that? So there's a social aspect to it, psychological aspect to it. And also, how do we design our interventions? How do we design our communications? How do we communicate with people to get them to comply? So there's a design thinking aspect to it. There is a marketing aspect to it. And what we are doing here, there's an outreach aspect to it, because we want as many people, as many citizens as possible to participate in this, so that we are all in it together. So how do we do it in such a way that we can find a solution? So every day we'll be featuring different people from this task force. Today we have Mr. K V DHANANJAY, who's an advocate. He practices in the Supreme Court and also Karnataka High Court, and he has presented and argued a number of cases involving public health throughout a couple of decades. And he's also someone, like for example, we see on the tobacco packs a pictorial depiction saying why it is bad to use it. So he was conversation, so he can tell us his point of view, and from a legal point of view, what are the things we need to think about. So, okay. Hi. Hello, Dhananjay. How are you?
Hello, madam. How are you?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Are those all a lot of law books behind you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a occupational hazard, so it's always there.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for giving us your time, Dhananjay. I know you're very busy, and I was just giving a little introduction of why in this consultative group it's important to have people from different disciplines. So, can you tell us in your own words what role you're playing in this consultative group? What perspective would you like to bring to this consultative group?
Well, I think there is a great deal of work that a lawyer could do in a group like this. For instance, there are a couple of promising therapies that doctors want to start off on clinical trials. And if they were to pick up a law book and then, start applying to the government for approval to conduct a clinical trial, it will be months before they get any approval at all. So a lawyer here will have to therefore, inform the government that please do not fall back on your, typical clinical trial protocol to flag light a clinical trial here. This is a case of a pandemic, so you have to, take resort to different powers in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. So that's just one instance, and I think dozens. I've been a part of this great group over the last, for the last 2 weeks, and I can tell you, every day keeps us so very busy. And
Mm-hmm.
ironically, a large number of lawyers during this 21-day period might find their skills to be practically useless in a society which, in fact, finds itself at home. But
Yeah.
I can tell you, there's a great deal of contribution that lawyers could actively,
Yes.
provide here in this scenario and context.
Actually, before talking to you, I didn't even know that there was an Epidemic Act of 1897 that India has. And what do we need to know about it? Because it grants certain rights to the government to be able to do whatever it takes to contain a pandemic, etc. Maybe tell us a little bit about, what does this act mean for all of us?
It's a 123-year-old law, and the context for this law was the plague that was, in fact, troubling the city of Bombay then, now what is Mumbai. And that is why this law is a very short legislation. This is one of the shortest laws that we have. It runs into mere 2 pages.
Wow.
What it does is to give the state governments the power to recognize that there is an epidemic that's there in their territory, and to deal with
Mm-hmm.
that epidemic, they have to be given vast powers. Like, for instance, quarantine people or direct people to go into their homes for a 21-day period or for whatever other period. So the power is given in very general terms because very often laws give restrictive powers to the government, whereas the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 gives vast
Mm-hmm.
powers to the government and says that the government could give any instruction whatsoever to anybody with a view to
Right.
mitigate a pandemic. And the person who receives that instruction will be bound to behave accordingly. And should he violate, then there is a punishment. That punishment will be decided by the Indian Penal Code, Section 188, which essentially
Mm-hmm.
is a private citizen violating an instruction given by a public servant. And there is a
Mm-hmm.
punishment of 1 month if it's a minor violation, and there's a punishment of 6 months if it's a major violation, and that's it. So
Yeah.
the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897, it's a 123-year-old law, and we could, in fact, it's good for today. It's good for another 100 years.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, all of you who are listening, who have joined us, feel free to ask questions, and I'll repeat it too. And both of us can see the questions, and I will pick the right ones and make sure they get answered in this session. So my next question is about, we are under lockdown right now, and there's all sorts of speculation that it may not end on 14th, it may end on 14th. I'm not interested in that speculation. But what I wanted to ask you is that, is there a strategic way to open the lockdown? I mean, the reason we put the lockdown is we wanted to get a handle on the situation. So is there something we need to do to come out of it?
I wish people in our government knew clearly, when they would be comfortable opening up the lockdown. I don't think they have any clue whatsoever, simply because the 21-day lockdown is a lockdown that a number of scientists have advocated. And for that
Mhm.
reason, it was fair for the government to listen to scientists because in the time of a pandemic, you want to be guided by scientific advice. But scientists were also saying something more than merely locking up people for 21 days, and that is to test and test and test. I think we have fallen behind on that. And this
Mhm.
lockdown is going to produce massive damage to the society, in any society whatsoever. And that damage would be justified if only we take preventive measures in those 21 days. But I think on that front, we are largely failing. We have not
Mhm.
been testing enough people, and it's testing alone that will give us the confidence to say, maybe we've brought it under control. And in these 21 days, we were supposed to ramp up our hospital capacity, bring in more ventilators and make sure that PPEs are purchased in enough numbers. But I think on that front, you will find bland declarations coming from the state governments, various state governments, and not real precise information at all. Because it's really very tragic to see doctors dying, and you don't want to go that path because Italy did go that path, and we've seen what happened. 14% of the casualties in Lombardy region were of medical personnel, and they registered so many deaths. And We don't really
Yeah.
want to go that path at all. And the first order of business is to get PPEs. Now, at the end of
Mhm.
21-day period, I am not very sure if the government would be confident to let people come back into the broader society, because in that event, we would have accomplished nothing in those 21 days, and all the humanitarian loss and damage to our economy would have been for nothing whatsoever.
Mm. And
So
I think it's not that easy to get the PPEs. I mean, we are on one hand trying to get more of them available to everybody, and because there's a shortage of it, there's manufacturing issue. So I think we are dealing multiple things at the same time. And in India, we also have an issue of just numbers, right? I mean, we certainly don't have enough doctors to serve the 130 crores we have of people we have here. But even for the doctors we have here, we are not able to keep up probably with the manufacturing of PPEs and things like that. So on one hand, we are trying to ramp that up, at least from my understanding. And on the other hand, we have to keep people at home. So we have to keep doing both of them so that the doctors are more safe and while people stay at home, because if one or the other goes topsy-turvy, I think it's going to be difficult. And to continue on that, Sumant from here has asked, are insurance companies able to deal with an epidemic? Do they have clauses? Do they know how to deal with this?
health insurance, no, I don't think people take health insurance very often that will cover the cost of treatment for an epidemic, for an infectious disease that's coming through an epidemic. So, in that regard, I believe the government of India has already informed the various health insurance companies that they should also cover the cost of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
A person may incur towards treatment of COVID-19. But I think that apart, there's no clarity really on where a person who is diagnosed with COVID-19 could go first. In cities, you have, of course, a map laid down in which people will get to know these are the first line hospitals that you are permitted to get into. But that's only so far as cities are concerned. But a bulk, more than half our population is outside of cities. So
Right.
we don't really have information about it. And to answer the question specifically,
Yeah.
the government has in fact taken up a few steps, but that's I think that will be refined moving forward. Now, if
Yeah.
the question was about general insurance, which is
Mm.
like if a business were to stop for a certain length of time to comply with the
Yeah.
lockdown order,
Mhm.
will the business be able to claim a loss of profit, or for that matter, they have reneged on contracts with some other party, and that party may
Mhm.
sue them for this or that. So, if the question was directed towards general insurance, then I think that's really a wild, wild west at this point of time, because our general insurances don't cover that, don't cover loss of profit due to a lockdown.
No, I think this was more around health insurance because another question is there right now about will the insurance companies provide reimbursement of the cost incurred, etc. So I think it's about health insurance. The bottom line is this is a new scenario. Nobody knows how to deal with it, and the government is working with the insurance companies to see if they can cover the treatment. Otherwise, there are government, suggested hospitals where you can go to. So we are learning this as we go along. I don't think there is, nobody has predicted this, so it's neither there nor not there from what my understanding.
Very true. And but 1918. By the way, I think we have to remember what happened to us in 1918. We suffered the most casualty in that year when the Spanish flu ravaged the whole world. 10% of our
Mhm.
population got wiped out. That's the estimate, because nobody really has reliable account of whatever. So I think
Mm.
India has suffered a great deal when pandemics strike, and for that reason, I think we've got to be very careful this time. And
Right.
very often we can't just take guidance from the measures imposed in Western countries, because there are problems
Correct.
that are unique to us. As part of my fight against tobacco, what I've also understood is in these 21 days,
Mm.
we will also witness one thing, which is according to the government's report, we have
Mm.
17 crore users of chewing tobacco and pan masala
Mm-hmm.
in this country. And on an
Yeah.
average, every user would spit 3 times a day. So on
Mm-hmm.
every day, on a daily basis, we have 50 crore spits. happening of chewing tobacco or pan masala, and it's really going to be bad from an infectious disease control point of view. So the
Interesting.
Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897, Section 2, is a vast power under which the governments could direct people not to consume, or for that matter, not to use chewing tobacco or pan masala, because everybody knows, saliva is in fact a good reservoir of viruses. And if we have community transmission in our country, and if there are a lot of people that have remained undetected, you don't want them to chew pan masala, spit it on in public place, and let other people get infected. We don't want to go that route. So that's
Right.
awaiting. So this consultative group will be making a request to the government probably tomorrow or day after tomorrow on that.
That's amazing. I think you're absolutely right. I think we just can't take solutions in other part of the world and blindly apply it to India. We really need to understand the Indian psyche, the Indian behavior, and communicate in the same way, and there was another question from Manav Kumar, I think, what about the Section 144 and what are the rights of the citizens?
Well, Section 144 is a curfew that's very often imposed to deal with the law and order, what do you call a disorder, problem. So it's not really useful to deal with a situation where you're dealing with a pandemic, because 144 is more or less absolute. If people are informed that they can't be on the road, they just can't be there on the road at all. And if they were to still come over to the road, then the police would be given drastic power to, drive them off, or probably, inflict punishment on them on the spot. So 144, unfortunately, is a power that a number of police forces have resorted to, but it's not really suitable to deal with a pandemic like this, because, there are some people that say that we want 100% lockdown. I think lockdown is meaningful, no doubt, but what is this 100% lockdown? Every day you have 26,000 deaths in this country. 26,000. So when a death happens, you could expect at least 4 persons to accompany a dead body up to the crematorium. And
But that
before
is
the day,
not just COVID deaths you're talking about. You're talking about general deaths,
I'm
or
talking
when
about
you
the
say
general mortality.
general
General
deaths, yeah, it
mortality
could be
is
an accident, it could be a heart attack, whatever,
yeah. So we have well published data about the number of deaths that happen every day. So we have 24,000 deaths every day. So when police want people to stay at home, they should also recognize that there are these emergencies that could force people to come out of their houses. So
Right.
144 is not proper. The police will have to, of course, go under the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 only, and book people that in fact are on the road without a justified, without a good reason. So that's how.
Yeah, yeah. And, I know we just talked a minute ago about one thing you're going to suggest to the government about banning this spitting and all this kinds of stuff. What other legal suggestions would you have for the government, from your point of view? What else would you like to see happen?
Well, the PPEs, we drafted a letter the other day, and then we shared it with the different doctor organizations, because very often when somebody is communicating to the government, there has to be a certain level of respect that you give, and you also have to be firm about your demand. And unfortunately, we saw a couple of requests that people were making to get PPEs, and we found out, I mean, I personally found out that those requests were not somehow appropriate. They were really not being respectful enough for that matter. They were not communicating the resolve of the doctors. So what we did is we created a draft letter and we've circulated it. And if doctors find that that demand is not going to be met, then I think we will prepare a petition so that doctor groups can approach the high courts in every state. Look, every state in this country has a high court, and the judges in this country appoint themselves. And the reason they provide for self appointment is that we want to do more good to the people, and we want to hold the government to the account. So when we have high courts in every state, we want doctor associations to approach the high courts when they find that repeated requests to the government is not getting them enough PPEs. Because I can tell you, PPEs are not coming forth at all. We only have assurances, and every day we are really very scared when we hear hear about some doctor, getting sick or getting infected.
Right.
And these are early days, and this is all the time that we have. Anybody who thinks that, okay, we have it under control, I think are simply deluding themselves. And we have the benefit of seeing how it has played out in other countries. And we have a very
Mm-hmm.
fragile healthcare system. I think we have to acknowledge it. And so,
Yeah.
unless and until we acknowledge that we have a very fragile healthcare system, I don't think we are really going to mount a big fight against COVID, because the fight against COVID in our country has to come from an acknowledgement that our medical resources are, of course, very, very fragile.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I mean, even our doctor to, population ratio is very, very skewed. We have very few doctors for the people that we have. I just want to touch on one thing you said earlier about there are innovators, there are innovations coming up. Maybe somebody has come up with a very low cost PPE or a ventilator or whatever. And in a typical time frame, there are lots of approvals they have to go through before it can even come to the market. What sort of things are you suggesting, about how do we can there be a window that the government open where people can submit innovations very quickly, or is there something you're thinking about in that area?
Clinical trials. Now, I'll come to innovations in a while. When it comes to clinical trials, President Trump has been touting the anti-malarial drug, hydroxychloroquine, and then azithromycin. He's been touting it. But his own medical infectious disease expert has been contradicting him by saying there's not enough evidence. So we need clinical trials. Now, the thing is, we seem to be dependent on some other country doing this for us, but whatever they do, it's not going to be good enough for us. So I would request the central government to ensure that clinical trials will be expedited. Now we are almost 2 weeks into the lockdown. How many clinical trials have we flaglighted? Because there are people that want to try convalescent plasma, that is actually to take antibodies from the blood of a person that has recovered from the infection, and then to try to distill it and refine it, and then to inject it into another person that's now suffering, to find out if he will be able to mount a good immune response to the infection. So it's for the government to come forward, but we don't see the government coming forward at all. In fact, I took about 3 days of my time to get into this whole thing, to prepare a legal opinion to say that the government should do away with the 2019 clinical trial rules, because the 2019 clinical trial rules are great, but they're great for a peaceful time. They're not great or good for a pandemic time. For a pandemic time, the government has to, in fact, adopt a very different approach. Now, unfortunately, that different approach is just not available in the statute. So we had to a team of us, we had to work electronically at a distance and then to put together a legal opinion. It took us 3 days. And I was just thinking, this essentially is the work of the government. We have a drug controller, we have a CDSO, we have the central government with vast resources. What are they doing about clinical trials? Why are they not saying that we will put a couple of our infected people on hydroxychloroquine, and then azithromycin and find out how they respond? What is happening is we are looking into the data from France, and a lot of doctors here might feel that, look, ethnically we are a bit different, isn't it? Because one of the purposes of clinical trials is to make sure. Why are we not doing it? Why do we have to depend infectious disease experts from outside of India? We have a wealth of talent right here in India. That's not happening now. As far as the kids are concerned, it's a bit disappointing also to note that this is a time when a lot of innovators have come forward to say that, oh, we have come out with this, we have come out with that, and it will take 2 months for us to ramp up production.
Sorry, we are having.
Nobody has 2 months to start with, number one. Number two, innovation in terms of equipment very far, because it will take a great deal of time to manufacture new stuff.
When you say equipment, you mean things like ventilators and stuff like that? Hello? I think we're having some internet problems. Sorry. So we'll try to get him back. Sorry, we are having difficulty. Can you hear me? Dhananjay, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can't hear you. Maybe I'll disconnect and connect you. Just give me a second. Let me disconnect you and then connect you. Okay. Sorry, we are having difficulty. I apologize about this, but we'll get Dhananjay back some other time. I just want to wrap up by saying that just to summarize what Mr. Dhananjay has said, I mean, he's somebody who's in the Karnataka High Court. So when he says we are writing an opinion, he's working with the best. So I think we are in a situation, this pandemic is new to everyone. It's new to the central government, new to the state government, new to the ministers, new to the people who authorize clinical trials, new to doctors, new to everybody. So it's like as though we are in a race where we have our two legs on two different horses and they're racing, and we are trying to keep up. So on one hand, it's very important in what he said. On one hand, the government needs to get much faster in their ability to grant clinical trials, in their ability to make the environment safer for doctors, in their ability to take advice from experts and act on it very, very quickly. So we need to do that. And on the other hand, as citizens, we may need to be, even more patient, because things are not going to happen overnight. So we all need to do our part. And, one of the things he said that was very interesting to me was about people who have the habit, 17 crores of people, 17 crore users of pan masala and tobacco and spitting in public spaces. So even something as specific as that can have a huge impact. So there'll be some laws coming into places. We shouldn't think about it as taking away our personal freedom. We should think of how it can benefit everybody. So, stay tuned. We'll bring different experts every day, and then we'll be presenting to you different aspects of this advocacy group to tell you how we are challenging COVID and how we are working with it. Thank you very much for tuning in.